If you've been sinking hours into Anno 117, which of course landed late in 2025,
Yeah.
you absolutely know the feeling.
Oh, yeah.
It's that moment you pull up your city panel and all the crucial indicators are just flashing red.
Low workforce, your income is starting to plateau, maybe even dip.
And there's this constant sense that your beautiful, your Roman or Celtic settlement is maybe one negative status effect away from total collapse.
It's the eternal puzzle of the city builder genre, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it feels amplified in the Anno series, where efficiency isn't just a nice goal to have, it's survival.
It really is.
Yeah.
That constant pressure forces you into this cycle of asking, how do I scale up? How do I build my army or my fleet without my essential workforce, the tier 1 citizens, the waiters, just suddenly abandoning their posts?
And that question is exactly what we're tackling today.
That is precisely our mission. We went deep, really deep into the most concentrated source of high-level optimization out there. The community insights, the pro tips, the threads where veteran players are sharing the mechanics they've cracked wide open.
We're trying to cut through all the noise here to give you what feels like the ultimate shortcut to solving that workforce crisis in Anno 117.
And what we found, it really challenges the basic assumptions of the game.
It does. Most players, and this is totally logical, approach population management thinking, okay, I need to fulfill basic needs, food, water, a market, to keep people happy so they can level up.
The standard progression path.
Right. But this new strategy says, forget leveling up, for now anyway. Focus on exploiting these hidden systems to multiply your lowest tier population.
The moment that crystallized this entire deep dive for me was a claim that just sounded impossible. How can a small clump of residential housing generate over 1,000 available workforce?
Right. Any experienced player would hear that and think, okay, that must require hundreds, if not thousands, of standard houses, a massive city.
Exactly. It sounds like a cheat code.
But it's not. It's a non-obvious mechanical feature. And the answer, it turns out, lies in fully utilizing all of your civic buildings.
All of them.
All of them. The community has found that these seemingly minor, often non-essential infrastructure choices, they create these massive compounded area effects. They're like hidden multipliers, just transforming basic waiter houses into these little manpower factories.
So we're ready to unpack this entire system, and we're starting with the absolute core finding that honestly demands a complete reevaluation of how you lay out your city. The main secret, the one that's circulating among all the hyper-efficient players, it's a very stark instruction. Use all your civic buildings from all tiers and for both Romans and Celts.
And that's not a suggestion for aesthetics, make your city look nice. It's presented as the singular solution to these perennial workforce deficits and flat income growth.
For anyone familiar with older Anno titles like 1800, this is a pretty radical departure from established strategy, right?
Oh, absolutely. Traditionally, you build only what is minimally required. You build to satisfy the populace or to trigger the next tier upgrade, and that's it.
You're all about lean efficiency.
Exactly. This strategy, though, it demands massive overbuilding of public services. You're not building a hospital because your citizens are sick anymore. You're building a hospital because it grants an unconditional hidden population buff.
And the potential that unlocks is just transformative.
Mm-hmm.
The player who first shared this huge breakthrough was able to create an incredibly dense Tier 1 waiter town.
And waiters are those foundational, low-maintenance citizens. The whole goal was to use this highly optimized, low-tier population to support huge infrastructure.
Like massive armies, vast navies, or even just generating a constant stream of random resources.
All without ever needing to advance those citizens to the higher, much more resource-intensive tiers. That's the genius of it.
Right. Tier 1 citizens, the waiters, they require such simple supply chains. Food, maybe some basic clothing.
And by hyper-optimizing their numbers, you minimize that complex logistical headache of high-tier production while you maximize the sheer output of available labor.
It's efficiency through, what, focus saturation, not vertical expansion?
Precisely.
Okay, this is where we have to get into the numbers, because the specific case study we saw provides some just jaw-dropping evidence that forces you to rethink everything.
The jump is phenomenal. I mean, in the optimized setup, the player noted that their basic waiter population per house went from a standard base of 4 people
4. Okay, that's the baseline.
to an incredible 16 people.
16. That's a 4x multiplier on the raw population living in a single building.
4 times the people crammed into the same physical footprint. And the critical link for your economy, the available workforce contribution per house, it mirrored that leap exactly.
So it went from a standard 2 available workforce units.
To 8.
8 available workforce units.
Yeah.
It's really hard to wrap your head around that exponential growth coming just from area effects.
But it's the direct cumulative outcome of just stacking every single available population buff from all those civic buildings.
And the player who is demonstrating this in a cluster they call just a few houses, which means less than maybe 2 dozen.
Right, a really small footprint.
They were able to achieve over 1,000 available workforce.
Which completely solves that early game workforce bottleneck. It proves that the population mechanic is heavily weighted towards these external unconditional area effects. They just override the standard supply and demand mechanics we're all used to.
I think we need to slow down and just contrast that for a second. If a standard house gives you 2 available workforce,
Yep.
to get to 1,000, you would need 500 unbuffed houses.
500, plus all the infrastructure to support them, spread across a huge swath of territory.
It would be a sprawling, inefficient mess.
A total mess. By contrast, this optimized strategy uses, maybe 20 houses, but subjects them to maximum civic buff saturation.
And you achieve the same workforce goal in an incredibly compact space with minimal ongoing maintenance costs for those Tier 1 goods.
The physical and the logistical savings are just monumental.
Now, in that specific player example, they did mention one production building, which was a Reed Shoes facility. For our listener, if the whole goal is to reduce complexity, why would you introduce a production chain for something that Tier 1 waiters don't strictly require?
That's a great critical question because it reveals the next layer of optimization that sits right on top of the civic stacking.
Okay.
The Reed shoe production facility, it wasn't there to satisfy a population need at all. It was there purely to enable the use of a specialist item.
Ah, okay, so it's a slot.
It's just a slot, in this case, for a +2 income green specialist.
So it's all about synergy. You build a minimal production chain, like Reed Shoes, purely as a vessel to employ a specialist.
And that specialist gives you a substantial income buff, which then offsets the pretty substantial construction and maintenance costs of all those civic buildings you've just placed.
Right, because even if they're cheap individually, building 8 or 10 of them adds up.
It adds up. So you're leveraging a specialist to handle that cost trade-off. That green income specialist ensures the whole operation is not just manpower efficient, but it's financially profitable too.
It's classic Anno optimization. Using a non-essential good just to access massive buffs from specialists, and then layering that on top of the primary civic stacking strategy.
Exactly.
So the core message for you, the listener, is really clear here. Stop looking at civic buildings as just expenses or boxes to check. View them as population growth engines.
They grant these unconditional multiplicative buffs that operate entirely outside the basic need and demand mechanics you're used to. You're not looking for satisfaction.
You're seeking saturation. Okay, so we know we need to saturate our residential blocks with these civic buildings, but let's get specific and define the toolkit. Which buildings are we actually talking about here?
Well, based on the community sources, civic buildings are defined as basically any public service structure that has a large quantifiable area of effectability.
So not just the obvious ones.
No, the whole roster. We're talking about the market, the police station, the hospital, the theater, the bathhouse, the forum, the aleatory, and the temple.
That's a pretty extensive list, and several of those, like the temple, theater, and aleatory, they're often associated with patrician or even higher tiers.
Right. And in the early game, many players, myself included, would postpone building those because of the cost and the fact that Tier 1 waiters, they just don't demand them.
And that is the crucial, completely non-obvious point that this whole strategy exploits.
It is. The core mechanic is that every public building on that list projects an area of effect. And that area of effect grants an unconditional population buff. Regardless of whether that building is actually listed as a required need for the residents inside its radius.
Okay, let's break that down because that is the most important conceptual shift.
Yeah.
If a Tier 1 waiter house is inside the radius of a high-tier structure, let's say a temple,
Yep.
that waiter is suddenly contributing an extra population bonus, even though they have absolutely no cultural or religious need for a temple.
That is precisely right. The game system registers this not as a satisfaction reward, like providing food satisfies a need. It's a proximity reward.
A proximity reward. I like that phrasing.
You are physically close to a major civic structure, and the game rewards that proximity with an increased population multiplier. The buffs from the forum, the bathhouse, the aleatory, the temple, they just stack relentlessly.
And that's how you get to that 4x multiplier.
Exactly. The moment you grasp that distinction, the difference between proximity and satisfaction, your entire city planning priority just flips on its head.
You're no longer thinking vertically, I need to tier up, I need to get to patricians. You're thinking horizontally, I need maximum building overlap.
Yes, and the community, they singled out a couple of these structures for providing just exceptional value. The sources highlight the Bath and the Forum as being really good.
Why those two specifically?
Specifically because they each grant a highly effective +3 population buff.
Wow, a +3 buff from two separate, relatively early structures. You stack those two, and you've already added 6 people to every single house in that overlapping radius.
And that's before you even consider the temple or the aleatory or anything else. That stacking is how you climb from 4 waiters per house to 16.
The mechanics pretty dry, but the community commentary around these buildings is actually pretty amusing.
It is. For example, regarding the Forum, one player noted the irony of it. While proximity to the baths makes sense for, hygiene,
Sure, that's logical.
the Forum's appeal seems to be that residents just prefer to live where they can, and I'm quoting here, drunk argue in public.
It's the perfect reflection of how absurd optimization can be, right? The Forum, whatever its noble political purpose is supposed to be, it just acts as a buff beacon.
And it's probably fueled by the aleatory you built right next door.
Of course.
Wow.
It just illustrates that the game engine is blind to the narrative. It doesn't care about the story. It only sees the radius and the buff attached to it.
Which forces us to think about the primary design implications for city planning.
Right. If the goal is maximizing residential houses within the range of all these civic buildings, this surely dictates incredibly rigid, dense, and maybe kind of ugly layouts at first.
It does. The new priority is density and saturation. You have to maximize the number of residential buildings within the overlapping service radius of the Governor Villa, which anchors the whole settlement and every single civic building that's available to you.
Okay, so this directly leads to the question of redundancy and cost. If I have a massive residential block and one forum only covers, say, 50% of the houses, I need a second forum, even though my overall Tier 3 citywide requirement for a forum is already satisfied by the first one.
That is the mandate of this efficiency strategy. You absolutely must build 2 or even 3 versions of the same buff-giving building to ensure every single residential house is fully saturated by that area in effect.
Which feels so wrong to an experienced Anno player.
It feels wrong, but the sources repeatedly emphasize that while this means building more civic infrastructure than is strictly necessary, the expenses for these services are generally quite low.
So the cost analysis is simple. The small, manageable maintenance cost of a redundant temple is just overwhelmingly dwarfed by the massive compounding benefit of that 4x workforce being generated passively.
Exactly. You're trading money for manpower, and since manpower unlocks your entire economic engine, it is always the right trade to make.
But there's a massive caveat here, isn't there? A common challenge in all city builders: distance.
A huge one. None of these meticulously planned area effects matter if the service reach is stunted.
We've established that civic buildings are the key to multiplying your population, but that multiplication is worthless if the services can't physically reach the residential buildings.
Which brings us head-on into the issue of infrastructure, specifically streets.
Service range is critically important in Anno 1.17. A lot of public buildings, especially the market and other early services, they rely on the street network to define their effective radius. It's not just a fixed circle.
Right. So to truly maximize the reach of the 8 or more civic services you're stacking, upgrading your road network in those dense residential districts is completely non-negotiable.
I remember that anecdote in the sources where one player realized they had just, forgotten they'd unlocked street upgrades.
Happens to the best of us.
But upon upgrading just a few axes of streets, so the main arteries connecting their dense blocks, they claimed, and this is a quote, "All my city problems vanished."
That's a powerful testimonial.
It really is. It just highlights the silent bottleneck that poor road quality represents.
If you have a Tier 3 forum ready to give that awesome +3 buff, but the waiters live 2 blocks too far down a dirt track, they get nothing.
The 4x multiplier is just immediately disabled.
Gone. Therefore, players are advised to aim for concrete streets at a minimum to achieve that maximum service reach.
And while, marble streets exist and they look fantastic, aesthetically pleasing, concrete is the functional floor for this optimization strategy.
Correct. But this mandate for upgraded roads immediately introduces what the community calls the concrete crisis.
It's a notorious bottleneck in the Anno 117 early to mid-game progression.
A huge one.
So let's elaborate on this crisis. Why is concrete so painful to produce domestically?
Well, the production chain for it is it's complex and it's slow. It requires multiple intermediary goods.
You need limestone, which you have to mine.
You need clay, which you usually have to excavate. And these often require you to set up multiple production buildings, quarries, kilns, mixing plants.
And then you have to manage the internal logistics of getting those bulky materials to the final production sites.
It's just slow, it's resource intensive, and it uses up valuable space and, crucially, workforce that could be applied somewhere else.
And the scale of demand is just massive, isn't it? If we're covering all our dense, optimized city blocks with concrete, we're talking about a lot of resources.
Millions. Players have actually quantified this, citing the need for up to 3 million units of talenta, that's the standard resource unit of concrete, just to properly outfit the street network on a single major island.
3 million. Trying to produce 3 million units of anything through a sluggish domestic supply chain is a multi-hour, tedious grind that just stalls all of your other progression.
Completely.
So we have this strategic imperative upgrade roads that runs headfirst into a mechanical logjam concrete production.
And this is where the efficiency masters pivot. They propose a strategic evasion tactic.
Using trade.
Using trade. They argue that trading in Anno 117 is far more efficient and volume-heavy than it was in prior titles like 1800. The solution is simple. Set aggressive buy orders for concrete on every island you control.
But this requires capital, it requires denarii. But if we follow the advice from Part 1, our income should be pretty robust.
Should be. So you can weaponize your currency, your denarii, which is far easier to generate than concrete is to produce.
That's the core realization. Money is abundant if you have a massive optimized Tier 1 workforce, thanks to the sheer tax volume and that income specialist you deployed.
So you use that easily accessible denarii to bypass the entire concrete production hurdle.
So how does the trade mechanism work best for this specific tactic? What's the practical step?
The recommended method is to use the maintain stock settings in your harbor. This lets you automatically set a buy order that will keep your stock of concrete at a maximum level whenever a passive trader shows up.
Okay, so you don't have to actively manage routes.
No. And while players do acknowledge that these passive traders can feel painfully slow or unpredictable in their arrival times, the critical discovery in 117 is that when they come, they bring a lot.
So you just have to be patient. You set the order, make sure you have enough denarii in the bank, and then just wait for these massive intermittent influxes of concrete to arrive.
And slowly but surely, you'll meet that 3 million talenta demand. It transforms concrete from a domestic production problem into a simple cash flow problem.
And the consensus is that this is just so much more worth it than struggling with dedicated domestic production, especially early on.
Absolutely. It allows you, the player, to run out of nothing for minimal money. And it frees up those crucial early game production slots for generating goods that are profitable or goods that simply can't be traded, like certain specialist items.
This is a beautiful example of cross-system synergy. Optimized workforce gives you income.
Income solves the infrastructure problem.
Solved infrastructure enables maximum service reach.
And maximum service reach ensures the workforce optimization is achieved in the first place.
It's a self-reinforcing virtuous circle.
So the economic and the workforce scaling we've just discussed is fantastic, but efficiency players often hit the next wall pretty quickly. Technological stagnation.
Right. The community frequently complains that research is dreadfully slow. People are desperate for strategies to generate more and faster research.
And this is where the versatility of that civic building optimization really shines, because the principles we use to multiply the workforce density and saturation are perfectly reusable for knowledge generation.
It all links back to those high-density population centers we just figured out how to create.
Exactly. The community has developed a very specific, high-yield knowledge generation goal that directly leverages these dense populations. The target is to reach a knowledge stat of over 9,000.
Over 9,000. That sounds like an absolutely astronomical number for early to mid-game research. Why is 9,000 the magic number? And how on earth is that achieved without endlessly expanding your population tiers?
Well, the 9,000 threshold seems to be tied to reaching these key research milestones that dramatically accelerate your technological unlocks. We're talking better production chains, advanced military units, powerful permanent buffs.
Okay, so it's a major tipping point.
It is. And it's achieved not just by having a dense population, but by deploying the full civic building strategy across 3 islands of a similar, highly optimized size.
So that single optimized waiter town generating 1,000 workforce, it becomes a template that you basically copy-paste onto 2 other islands.
And each one of them contributes to your global research pool. You are multiplying your density factor by 3.
But I assume, just as with the workforce strategy, there are probably specialist items that are essential to convert that raw population density into this enormous knowledge stat.
Absolutely essential. The requirement for hitting this high knowledge number is the deployment of the Blue Knowledge Specialist.
And where do you get those?
They're often acquired through quests, expeditions, or specific trade routes, and deploying them in your research buildings or buildings that interface with knowledge provides a substantial boost.
And the source is mentioned as specific elite specialist too, Minerva.
Yes. For players who are looking to maximize their output to go even beyond 9,000, using the legendary specialist Minerva is the bonus optimization.
And what does she do that's so special?
Specialists like Minerva usually grant these unique, massive percentage boosts to knowledge generation, often derived from the total surrounding population or the quality of the nearby civic buildings.
So this requires us to understand how we deploy them. They're not just placed on a random house, right?
Yeah.
They need a specific building.
Correct. They need to be assigned to the appropriate buildings. The Blue Knowledge Specialists, or Minerva, are typically placed in the research buildings themselves, or sometimes in the governor's villa, if the item specifies a citywide effect.
So the mechanism is that the dense, buffed population on those 3 islands acts as the base input for knowledge generation.
And the specialists then provide a massive percentage multiplier on top of that input.
Which means, without that dense population base provided by the stacked civic buildings, the specialist multiplier is applied to a really small number, and you get poor results.
Exactly. It's why the research placement strategy reinforces that initial civic building density goal. Research buildings should be placed everywhere densely populated to maximize their interaction with those buffed-up waiter zones.
Placement is everything.
It really is. You have to ensure the research buildings are optimally positioned to benefit from the population density that the civic buildings create in the first place.
Now, let's just take a moment to acknowledge the player who looks at this intricate 3-island optimization plan and just thinks, that sounds exhausting.
You have to. Recognizing that deep mechanical optimization isn't for everyone, the community did offer a simple, non-mechanical fix for the research slowdown.
Which is?
Change the setting in the game setup.
I love that we include this. It provides that necessary balance between, mechanical exploitation and just quality of life customization.
Right.
So you, the listener, can choose. You can choose whether you want to grind for 9,000 knowledge or simply set the research speed to fast at the start of your game and just skip the whole process.
And that lets you focus purely on city aesthetics or logistics or whatever part of the game you enjoy most. It respects all playstyles.
You can either master the internal logic of the game to beat the system,
or you can customize the external parameters to achieve the pace of advancement that you want. Both are valid.
Okay, let's circle back to that foundational rule we started with. Use all civic buildings from all tiers, and for both Romans and Celts. This whole thing hinges on faction synergy.
It does.
So how does the game actually allow players to build structures from both the Roman and Celtic factions at the same time?
This involves clarifying the initial faction choice you make and then a later unlocking mechanic. When you start in Albion, you have to pick between Celt or Roman services.
And that choice determines your initial architectural style, your early civic buildings, your whole progression path.
Right, but the optimization strategy, that core 4x multiplier, it requires stacking all available buffs. And it's highly likely that a Roman forum provides a different stackable buff than, say, a Celtic temple.
That's the assumption, and it's correct. The genius of the synergy is that your initial faction choice is temporary. The critical unlock happens once either faction Roman or Celt achieves Tier 3 for the first time.
Tier 3 being the patricians, that mid-game population level.
Exactly. Once you hit that patrician milestone, you are then permanently free to build either or both Roman and Celt services on all of your islands.
And that is the key moment that enables the full optimization strategy.
So you can deploy Roman baths and Celt alleytories side by side, stacking their independent area effects onto the same dense weight or houses.
That's it. The game rewards your mid-game progression by essentially giving you double the Civic toolkit.
Which allows you to maximize that population buff stacking way beyond what a single faction could ever achieve.
It ensures that your initial choice isn't a long-term penalty. It guarantees that the highest tier of optimization is available to everyone who progresses far enough, making that Tier 3 milestone a crucial trigger for system exploitation.
Now let's turn to the broader consequence of this massive population scaling. The ability to generate thousands of waiters. It feeds into this massive philosophical debate within the community.
A big one, yeah. It's about overall game flow and the timing of military unlocks.
It's the core complaint that the timing of population scaling feels out of whack compared to when military defense structures become available.
Right. What are players specifically complaining about when it comes to the population curve?
The primary frustration is that the population problem, that persistent lack of available workforce, it effectively vanishes in the late game, especially once you hit Tier 3 and can execute the optimization strategies we just detailed.
And some players argue that this timing is indicative of bad game design.
Why does solving the workforce problem late feel like bad design?
Because of the need for military force. Players argue they need large available populations early on to field basic defensive structures and units.
We're talking low-quality troops, small skirmishing ships, basic palisades.
Exactly. However, they can't achieve the scale needed for these early defenses until they reach patricians at Tier 3 or higher, which is when they unlock the high-quality armies, the large warships, and the strong stone walls.
So the game gives you the tools for rudimentary defense, like the ability to train basic militia at Tier 1, but you lack the workforce volume to actually field a significant number of them until Tier 3.
At which point, those basic units are already becoming obsolete compared to the enemy threats you're facing.
The population curve is delayed compared to when the unlocks are most relevant.
And that leaves the player feeling really vulnerable during that crucial early phase, forced to neglect military development just because they lack the bodies.
One veteran player summarized this tension perfectly by saying, if you map the population growth curve against when various items and units are unlocked, it feels out of whack,
suggesting a need for a massive system rebalance.
This tension forces players into a very passive early game, focused purely on economy, instead of engaging with the military layer that is, technically unlocked.
It's a strategic constraint that's just imposed by the mechanical timing. You look at the unlocks. Tier 1 and 2 give you simple archers and spears and small scout ships. Tier 3 gives you the Praetorian Guard and large galleys. The manpower requirement for a strong early defense is just not met by the standard population mechanics.
However, our sources provided an excellent counterpoint to this whole argument.
They did.
Suggesting that the need for a massive early population is a perception problem, not a mechanical necessity. What was the counter-strategy for managing early defense without relying on thousands of early waiters?
The counter-argument focuses on minimalism and efficiency. It states that the player only needs the Governor Villa upgraded to Tier 2 and a single additional archer unit to effectively defend against most early invading armies or pirate raids.
Just that. A Tier 2 villa and one archer unit. How minimal is that requirement in terms of workforce?
That specific defensive combination requires only 150 workforce.
Not 150.
That's it. The counterpoint forcefully argues that players shouldn't be struggling to get 1,000 waiters just for defense. If you execute a focused, minimal defense strategy, you save your optimization efforts for the economy and your knowledge base.
Proving that the game does provide sufficient early defense tools without requiring the mass population that many players feel is missing.
It's a huge strategic relief for the listener. It means if you follow the optimization rules we laid out in Part 1, achieving that 4x multiplier, you can generate 150 available workforce with just a handful of houses.
And that leaves the rest of your growing workforce free to run your expanding economic infrastructure.
It means the optimization strategy isn't just about late-game scaling. It resolves the early-game defense issue by providing sufficient manpower for a focused, minimal defense.
It proves that the system works, even if the timing of the higher-tier military unlocks is still, subject to community debate.
The efficiency path ultimately solves both the economic stagnation and the early military weakness at the same time.
So we have completed a pretty comprehensive tour of the hidden mechanics of Anno 117. We've moved from those initial city frustrations to some really high-level systemic exploitation.
Let's try to distill this down into the most actionable knowledge for you, the learner. to apply to your game immediately?
I think the entire strategy can be summarized by 3 operational shifts that should change how you interact with every future city layout you make.
Okay, what's number 1?
First, you have to abandon the idea of satisfaction as the goal. Embrace saturation.
Stop viewing civic buildings as necessary evils. They are population buff machines.
Exactly. Deploy all of them, forum, bath, temple, aleatory, even if it seems redundant, just to maximize that area of effect overlap. This is your proven path to the 4x workforce multiplier per house.
Generating thousands of Tier 1 workers in a fraction of the space.
Second, stop grinding for concrete.
Please just stop. The infrastructure bottleneck for upgrading streets is best solved by evasion.
Use the trading solution we talked about. Set aggressive maintain stock, buy orders on all your islands, weaponize your optimized denarii income to purchase that 3 million talenta of concrete you need.
Skip the painful domestic production chain entirely.
And third, unlock faster tech through density. If your research is slow, you need multi-island saturation.
Aim for that 9,000 knowledge stat by copying your dense buffed cities across 3 islands.
And then augment that population base with the blue knowledge specialists, or the elite Minerva, to apply massive multipliers to your research speed.
What's truly rewarding about all this, I think, is that mastering these mechanics, it opens up the entire creative side of the game.
That's so true. The community frequently notes that once they solve the red numbers and they achieve high efficiency, they get more room for beauty in their city design.
They can finally move beyond the rigid grid-based boxes that are necessary for that early optimization and start incorporating flowing curves and unique historical layouts.
It is the ultimate reward. Freedom from function. You build the efficient core specifically to fund the beautiful sprawl.
You stop creating a spreadsheet nightmare and you start focusing on that visual masterpiece, whether you prefer the historical accuracy of a Roman castra or the organic growth of a Celtic settlement.
The function of the city is solved, which allows the form to finally flourish.
So we leave you with this final provocative thought, building directly on the strategic tension we discussed today.
Knowing now that you can generate 1,000 workforce with just a few houses by aggressively cramming residences into maximum civic radius overlap, which inevitably encourages dense, rigid layouts. Does maximizing this efficiency lead to the most functional city, or the most beautiful city?
And having cracked the code, how will you use this newfound mechanical freedom to balance those 2 conflicting design goals in your next deep dive into Anno 117?
Will you create the perfect optimized square? Or will you use the manpower reserves you now possess to finally embrace the curves and create a city you are truly proud of?
The choice between perfect efficiency and pure artistry is now, finally, fully in your hands.